It's Malcolm X Day, May 19th. And, I know that's not an official United States national holiday that's recognized, but a lot of people are starting to, over the last couple of years, recognize May 19th as Malcolm X Day. If you're talking about Malcolm X, there's a lot of different things you could talk about, because Malcolm X is like a lesson within a lesson within a lesson. Everything from his name, just his name and what it means and how it came to be and all that kind of stuff. I mean, even if you just look at that, we could sit here and talk for 40 minutes about that, right? If you want to just talk about his trip to Africa, his trip to Mecca, and you want to talk about his attitudes when he returned from Mecca, we could talk about that for 40 minutes. If you want to just talk about his death and the theories about who did that and why, we could talk about that for 40 minutes. If you want to talk about Malcolm Little, you want to talk about Detroit Red and what he was up to back in the day before he was in prison, you can talk about that for 40 minutes. You talk about that for hours. You could talk about his time in prison for hours. You could talk about his initiation into the Nation of Islam for hours. You could talk about his rise to be a prominent speaker in the Nation of Islam and how it basically caused the membership of the Nation of Islam by 1960 to be raised tenfold, by his involvement in his success as an orator. We could talk about that for hours. We could talk about his issues with Elijah Muhammad and the effects that had on on the rest of his life, on the outcome of his life. We could talk about that for hours. So it's really hard when you're trying to talk about something for Malcolm X Day to decide what to pinpoint and discuss, And if you guys got any suggestions about anything related, I'd be happy to do more at some time in the future. But for today, I really want to focus on two things. One, it's the fact that Malcolm X is really removed, essentially from history books, even the one written by Asante, for social studies classes in public school. And why? Why is there such a large emphasis on Martin Luther King Jr. over Malcolm X? And what else is missing? And then the other aspect I'd like to talk about is the story of Malcolm X's life. Just the general broad strokes, timeline of Malcolm X's life and those pinpoints on it, and the reason why that life is so important in terms of us in the future, decades after his death, to go back and look back and the value that life has on a young person that, is so young that they're not in any way besides remotely connected to that life, that nation he came out of, or anything like that. What's the value of that life and why should we reflect on it? I mean, they'll give you a million trillion reasons of why we should reflect on X, Y, and Z. You even learn more about Hitler in school than you learn about Malcolm X. Firstly, Martin Luther King Jr. definitely get a healthy dose of that in public school. There's absolutely no question that what they teach in general, from my experiences, not just as a student, but as a public school teacher, what they give you about Martin Luther King Jr. is enough. I mean, sometimes you read the whole speech, and I think the reason is because he's a very safe life to examine. His life, and with all due respect to him and his legacy, doesn't raise the kind of questions or raise the kind of eyebrows that Malcolm X's life does. So it's a very safe thing to put into a scholastic public school book or the canon, for it to be canonized. That's why, when you learn about the 1920s and 30s and you learn all about the Depression, but you're not going to really learn too much about Marcus Garvey or the Back to Africa movement. You're not going to learn too much about Noble Drew Ali. There's obviously a cherry-picked history that you're given in school, and certain things are just left out of it. And some of the reasons why they say these things are left out is because they're just so outstandingly far away from what we accept as history or what we accept as a philosophy of living, right? So when you look at somebody like Malcolm X and the things that he knew or believed, however you want to look at that, and the things that he spoke about, it's so far away, so far removed from the Protestant, Christian, waspy ideas that we've been given in this country this whole time that you can't put a pinpoint laser focus on it the way they put on Martin Luther King Jr., who was a Christian and who spoke a lot about integration and who spoke a lot about turning the other cheek. We're coming a couple of decades out of routine hangings taking place, right? And so you got somebody like Martin Luther King Jr., who basically had a philosophy of, protest, but peaceful protest, and, included all those Christian values, you know, that who brought that to the table? Where do we get the Christian values from here? Where did I get it? You know, where do we get it, right? So Martin Luther King carried all that with him. You know, he carried the slave master's religion with him, okay? And his philosophy was, you know, if somebody slaps you, you know, you turn the other cheek. And basically that's, like, I guess, an honorable thing to say, because if somebody slaps you and you turn the other cheek for them to slap or whatever it is, it's, you know, it's kind of a statement as a man that you make. But Malcolm X's statement was like, you slap me, instead of turning the other cheek, I'm going to slap the motherfucking shit out of you, all right? I'm going to march down to your goddamn hospital and demand to see Brother Johnson, motherfucker. Malcolm X absolutely did not say any of those things, but the attitude was there. The attitude was, I'm going to march down and make things right, and I'm going to demand freedom, justice, and equality by any means necessary, okay? So that attitude is a lot scarier for mainstream or white America to include in their textbooks and include in the canon of things that they teach to youth, especially young kids that may be starting to feel some of the frustration and starting to observe some of the way that things really work in the country as they're coming up as teenagers, and they got all that adrenaline and fucking testosterone and hormones pumping through them. They might not want to introduce these kind of ideas to those kids. And I'm just making an observation, and I'm just making an assumption. I don't know that's why that Malcolm X is not included in these books, but if I were to guess, I'd say it had something to do with that, you know? But I want to say that if handled properly, you know, Malcolm X's life and his life story can be nothing but empowering to the youth. And I'm not just talking about black. You take the timeline and it looks just like the hero's quest. And for those of you that know anything about literature, you know that the hero's quest is like Joseph Campbell, you know, Star Wars, any story, The Matrix, any story you can point to basically has that hero's quest where, you know, you start off in one place in the world where the hero is in a situation, and eventually you see the conflict in that situation, in that environment, and you see a meeting with the mentor, right? So where the hero meets somebody older, more sophisticated, or more wise, and helps that hero to overcome the obstacles. And then you see, of course, you know, the highest point of action, the climax. And you know, this is the just baseline story structure that most stories, Titanic, so, and the hero's quest is just the story structure, and Malcolm X's life fits it to a T in a positive way, because you know, you take his life and where he came up in the circumstances, you know, that he was in, you know, and you know, I'm not going to fill in all the blanks for you. You can read, please, if you're 13 or older and you haven't read the autobiography of Malcolm X with Alex Haley, you need to read the autobiography of Malcolm X with Alex Haley, 1965. It came out the same year as his death, like a posthumous book release. It was real successful at the time, but in the 80s, it got picked back up by Generation X, man, and then that book, the existence of it, not only did it inspire the movie Malcolm X by Spike Lee, which is one of Spike's better films in my opinion, and one of Denzel Washington's greater performances, but not only did it inspire those things, but young people, I mean, they were walking around, dudes were walking around, myself included, with X hats on, you know, and you know, that's how much Malcolm, who died 20 years before this was happening, had affected the youth at that time. I don't see that involvement or that knowledge of Malcolm X or his life or his journey in this generation currently, or even honestly in the generation that was growing up after us, you know, post-Generation X. It started to fall to the wayside a little bit. Almost knowledge of all that conscious stuff that we grew up exposed to has gone away. So if you are not out there right now buying a dirt cheap copy on Amazon or finding a copy or a PDF file of the autobiography of Malcolm X, you should shut me the fuck off and go read the autobiography of Malcolm X. Assuming you've already done those things, we'll move forward. So, looking at his life, I mean, you're dealing with a kid and then a teenager who's set into the most impossible circumstances. And you know, remove yourself from this, remove me, remove everything but just the story. You know, you got this young kid and he's literally, in a mythological sense, surrounded by devils, you know, surrounded by evil spirits, you know, and I don't want to get on some spooky shit, but I mean, surrounded by forces that are against him, you know, and he's been made to feel and think, and other than his own self, he's been made to feel and think that he can't even do the things that he's more than capable of doing, right? And so as a result, his actions and his ways are affected by the way he's been grown and the way his environment has raised him. So he's made all these decisions that's just put him into a terrible position, and now he's incarcerated, and he essentially has that meeting with the mentor, who, as we know, of course, is Elijah Muhammad, and that beginning, that changes his entire perspective on life. You know, it doesn't only just, it's not like he got some advice from an older guy, you know, he's going to go follow it. No, I mean, he sees the world differently based on that relationship with the mentor. Okay, where once he was a dog, now he's God. All right, where once he had nothing and he had no abilities, he had all the abilities. You know, where once he was incapable, now he was more than capable. Where once he was irresponsible, now he's responsible, able to respond to the situation that he's in. And he goes through a catapult growth period in a short amount of time, right, with the Nation of Islam. And then before you know it, his identity has moved from one of a person that is to be incarcerated, a person that's flailing around trying to find something to grab onto and survive in this life, to somebody that's mastered not only himself, but the ability to communicate this power to others and give it to others. I mean, that's the reason why a good part of the reason why the Nation of Islam's membership increased tenfold during the time that Malcolm first entered. When you guys watch that movie, you know, kids, you know, because I've showed this to my students for the last 15 years. When you guys watch, when you watch Malcolm X by Spike Lee, that's no substitute for the book. You're not going to read some of those details. You know, you're not going to get some of those things that you need to get from it. But even when you watch the Brother Johnson scene, and you got the Nation of Islam guys with their hats and their bow ties all marching down in unity, and they're marching down to the hospital so Malcolm can get some answers. And you see the police officers kind of observing and saying, no one man should have that power. Malcolm march in and say, I demand to see Brother Johnson. I mean, it's all a very powerful moment, because you know that this person, this character, this individual had come from this circumstance and was able to lift himself up with the help and get to the place where he's actually turning the heads and raising the eyebrows of people that were once his oppressors, right? So you got that. But the thing that you got to really let sink in is when you're looking at that huge line of men that are standing up straight, right? That are ready to back up Malcolm in any way, shape, or form they need to. It's what's inside those men's heads that makes it all the more impressive. Because if you were to go up to any one of them at that time, and you say, who is the original man? They're going to reply, the original man is the Asiatic black man, the maker, the owner, the cream of the planet Earth, the father of civilization, the god of the universe. If you're going to ask them the circumference of the planet, they're going to say that the planet is 196,940,000 square miles. It's covered in water by, you know, so I don't have to go too much further, but these guys had literally a blueprint in their head of redefining their existence on the planet. And Malcolm X was out, and he was essentially a salesman for that blueprint in a way. But Malcolm's life story was essentially a story about good versus evil, about God versus the devil. The end of his life confuses a lot of us because, you know, he was speaking more about integration at the end of his life, and he'd committed himself to Allah. He became an 85er. If you really want to look at it, Malcolm X was praying to that mystery God. That's the way he was, you know. So it's really tough to look at that. You know, he's praying to a mystery God. He's accepting whites. He's more about integration now. And that was a tough pill for a lot of people to swallow at the end of his life. Even if what the Nation of Islam were saying wasn't an 100% accurate account of world history, even if that was true, I'm not saying it is, but even if it were, you had to admire and respect the balls to try to rewrite something from scratch. Like, motherfucker, you brought us here. You took away everything we know about ourselves and all of our connections to where we're from, you know? But we dislike your shit so much, we're just gonna build our own shit from scratch, motherfucker. Take that, devil. I mean, you got to applaud that. I don't care what color you are. If you look at that story and you see somebody that's a baby, a teen, a young man, surrounded by evil, surrounded by forces that are against him, and without any help from outside forces, he takes one straight path all the way up to a point where he inspired the world in a way that we're still talking about him 50 years later. Well, however you feel about this kind of stuff politically, no matter what, if you're religious or not, if you're a Christian, if you're a Muslim, if you look away from Malcolm X, if you look away from the nation he came from, if you look away from the events that had to take place to make a nation like that necessary in the fucking first place, you're looking away from American history. You're looking away from the true story of who we are as a nation, and you're putting more and more time between you and where you start. You get on the day one beginning point from the dick, right from the beginning. You haven't even stepped over the fucking starting line until you look at this piece of our history. And Malcolm X is a great place to start. It's a life worth celebrating and a life worth studying. Peace.